Hey there, leader, and welcome to today's conversation where we're continuing with our roundtable series of Ask Anything, where we take your questions from social media and answer with our experts. Today we have with us once again Dr. Diane Wiater and Dr. Anthony Perdue. Hey there, leaders, and welcome to another Ask Anything episode on Conversations for Leaders and Teams. We're continuing this roundtable series answering your questions that have come in from social media. Today we have again with us Dr. Diane Wiater as well as Dr. Anthony Perdue, two experts in the field of leader development. I'm your host, Dr. Kelly Whelan. Welcome to the show. How
Glad to
are
be
you
here.
today? Everybody
Wonderful.
doing well on this? We are recording on a Wednesday afternoon are we still in May?
That's what they say.
We are in May.
We are.
It's okay. Every day forward, right? Every day that we get, one step forward throughout this pandemic that we're in, I think that it is, it's a good thing.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Driving
It
forward. Yes. Well, we have some questions that we're still working on from our original episode. And so thank you both for coming on and just joining in the conversation. So we're going to get right at it. The first question that I'm going to pose is how to leverage technology to grow influence. That is a question that came in. And, it seems like during this time, especially, we have people who perhaps have not been in the technology realm of working and even living and working until now. And so there has been this shift. I think everybody is using, I'll say Zoom, just like this conversation is recorded on Zoom. I've been using it for about a year, but there's been some people who are just stepping into the space of that, as well as, social media. So what are some thoughts around leveraging technology to grow influence that you've been kind of seeing or exploring yourselves?
I think the first thing is to really understand what influence is, right? And from a leadership perspective, influence is very important. Leadership, by and large, is influence of yourself and others towards a goal, right? And so if you are thinking about influence, even leveraging technology from a leadership perspective, leadership starts within. So it's like an inside out proposition. It starts with understanding who you are and why you are, your purpose, your values, and really what that stands for and how that shows up in the technology space through your actions. So whether you use a platform like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, it's really making sure that your influence in leadership, the influence in who you are, your value proposition is consistent across all of those. And as you show up in a technology way with that consistency, people will authentically know who you are. Mm-hmm. And I think that then starts to create your brand. So influence starts from within. You leverage the technology platforms to communicate that, and then your brand starts to become known and you start to grow. So I think that's how you, one of the ways anyway of leveraging technology to grow influence.
What about you, Dr.
And
Wiater?
I think to build on that as well. So I'm a late adopter. I'll admit that. I admitted that before. But I am familiar with different platforms. And along with what Dr. Perdue's saying about just the influence and that self, is also what is your message. So before you even think about what platforms are you going to use, what are the messages that you want to portray and get across? And even just these processes of lining up and considering what am I going to say, who am I going to say it to? That's a critical piece with that. I think along with that, then once you determine and understand those messages that you have and that you want to forward, then looking at where's my audience. You know, is my audience on Twitter? Is my audience on LinkedIn? Is my audience in TikTok? Is my audience in Facebook? And where do you want to create your messages and deposit them and that type of thing as well? So while I might be a late adopter, you know, I do work at the technologies and trying to use, you know, what's out there and where the people are that I most need to influence or want to influence or that want to hear from me. So those things are important, but
yeah. And you know, I think it's important. You know, both of you said some really great things there about, you know, messaging and how influence does start within. You know, who is our audience? How are we positioning our messages to add value? You know, through technology. So many times people, you know, they'll see a name, but they don't actually know about you. So it is a great way for people to kind of get an indication of who you are, especially through video. So they can really, or even audio, where they can hear your voice, where, you know, if it is video, where they can actually see you, your mannerisms and whatnot. I think that's important for people to see, to have an idea of who you are as a person, who that authentic self is coming through during those you know, videos or audios or even posts. You know, I remember back, I want to say, I think it was 2013, for a very short time I did videos on Facebook on one of my pages, and I thought, this is, you know, this is going to be great. And then of course life circumstances kind of happened and it fell off there, and now I'm back at it. But it was interesting, the mindset that I had then, and it was kind of a new type of way of communicating to an audience through video on Facebook back then. But now it's, I mean, if you're scrolling, I mean, you've got everything: Facebook, Instagram, and I think with that too, there are so many different platforms. Like Twitter's very quick. Like if you're not scrolling through, you're going to miss something, or somebody's going to miss your message. You know, Facebook, you know, you know, are you following somebody? Are you liking their page? There's differences with those things. You know, where are you most comfortable? I think has a lot to do with it too. And then you also have that leg of, do you have time to be posting? And if you don't have time, maybe you need to make a little bit of time if you're looking, you know, to get your message out there on technology. And again, if you don't have time, maybe you need to hire somebody or a service or an app, which, you know, I've used in the past, you know, to help me get moving with filtering my messaging and getting it out there to the different platforms. So there is a lot around technology with how we can influence leaders and our leadership.
Yeah, and also just building on that, I think a couple business sided focus areas. One is around analytics and really leveraging the power of these tools. Every platform that you mentioned has a feedback in terms of who your audience is, how long they spent on your video, how long they spent on your podcast, your page, to read your blog, whatever that might be. So it's really important as a leader that you understand leading data and leading analytics in order to gain that feedback loop. The other part is there's a term in business called differentiating value proposition. Most of the content that's being consumed falls into two buckets. One is to inform or to educate, right? So you're really teaching something where someone wants to go to learn how to do something. The other is really around entertaining. So there's this concept of can I get someone on my page, and that's where TikTok comes in, where it's, you know, quick entertainment, but I've seen where they mix it where it's infotainment, right? So I think part of finding what you're good at, what your differentiating value proposition is, because there's so much out there now, there's so much content being created that you really want to break through, but also trying to focus on what do you want to do? You want to educate, or do you want to inform, or do you want to entertain? And is there a way to possibly even merge those two for something creative, innovative, and new?
And this fits right along with the idea of that strategic planning component of our businesses as leaders and within the leader development. What are the goals? You know, really, how does this fit with the plan that you have and what you're trying to accomplish? So all of those pieces pull together for you, the individual, for your business, and really for the plans that you have. So how are you going to incorporate this? Why are you going to incorporate this? And then what feedbacks are you going to get that will even give you the information about the value that you're bringing to the table, or how many people are viewing what what you've created and what you're depositing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I also, to go along with those analytics as well, is really not giving up too soon. So, if it's that you're looking for likes, you're looking for, followers, a validation of your posts, you may not always get it, but that doesn't mean that you should stop doing it. If it's in your wheelhouse, if you feel like you're adding value, if you're, there is, high value on just getting your name out there. For people to repeatedly be seeing your name on a different platform, there's power in that. And so making sure that you don't give up, so soon. Do it for 90 days. Do it, for even longer than that. But I would say, the baseline would be, 90 days, evaluate, and then go from there.
Great
Yeah.
advice.
Yes. You guys are awesome. All right. Our next question. How can I use strengths to scale my business? And this could be, we can talk about Clifton strengths. We can talk about character strengths. We can talk about any type of strengths that are really able to help somebody scale a business. And I think it goes back to, what you said, Dr. Perdue, is about that influence, and truly it starts within, and knowing our purpose, and being consistent with our messaging, but then how that can also truly scale a business based on who you are and who you're created to be and bring.
That's right. In fact, I have a small story or short story about that. A couple of years ago, I took on a position in sales, actually, to run a division of sales in the East Coast for a startup company. I had two people that I started with, myself and another gentleman, and within 6 months, I had 50 people working for me, and we were the number one revenue producing and sales organization in the company. And part of it was exactly what you just said. One of the first things I did was really establish that core ideology and that vision. Why we are, our purpose and mission, our values, where we're going, that long-term vision, that 6-month vision, both from a business perspective, a culture perspective, and really from a growth and people perspective. And that really helped to establish that core ideology. The second thing I did, there's a book, I don't remember the author, but the book's called The E-Myth. And part of the E-Myth is really about how do you empower people on the front line. So there's this concept of, and we've talked about this, servant leadership. And so what I did was I actually modeled the way for every single position that I staffed. So whether it was, say, whatever channel I was selling to, I would be the first on that front line to establish it, establish the processes, establish the way of work, and I would empower someone else and train them so that they could take my position. So each time, for each position I wanted, I put myself in that position and tried to work myself out of a job to put someone else there. So every time I was able to do that, it's this concept of lifting as we climb. So someone was able to take that role, but then the organization itself, my team grew and grew and grew, and that's how we scaled. And I think the strengths component is really in having that internal strength to be able to let go and empower someone. So empowerment is another word for strength. So you're transferring your strength as a leader to someone else and influencing them and empowering them to do the job and do a job well done. So I think that's one of the ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's definitely, part of how we function and operate. One of the first things I think about when we're talking about strengths, whether we're talking about Clifton's strengths or just our own strengths, and an organization is really understanding that organization and how it works. So you might say, well, it's my business, but taking the time to assess what you're doing now and what is working now before you even think about growing and can really move into growing. Are the processes that you have in place working properly? Do you have that vision for the organization? Are you meeting goals? I mean, really, we're talking about those strategic components, but are these things already in place and are they working? So before you grow, I mean, there's a principle that I learned a long time ago when I worked for McDonald's, and that is, before you grow, you want to make sure that your own house is in order first. So that piece of assessing and then making sure that you're good, that all these things are functioning well before you move forward or before you even think about moving forward. So that's a piece when people talk about how do you leverage your strengths. Well, first it's, are we good? Are we settled? Are we well? And then really that we talk about those things all the time in business as a SWOT analysis. You may not have to do a full SWOT, but again, where are our strengths? Even though, like in my case with, it was a franchise operation, still, you can still look and say, okay, while we're doing all the systems right, what do we really do well? What is something, and how can we build on that to leverage even and grow even further? So that, again, that assessing, that evaluating, and that ensuring that we are in a good stead and in a good shape. So that principle, get your own house in order before you grow. I mean, all the manuals, it was a really interesting thing. You want to grow your sales? Okay, do a check internally first. And I think, when we really look at that, that's also a biblical principle, taking care of yourself, your own house before you go outward. Another principle that I learned is that you staff to the level that you want to grow. And oftentimes organizations, when they're looking to grow and build, they add on to your responsibilities the way it is now, instead of really thinking, what do we need to grow? And yes, when you're an entrepreneur, you're trying to tighten up and squeeze and grow in this way, but still that idea of, do we have the capacity and the capability to grow? And sometimes that capacity is additional staff or maybe an additional facility, but that whole idea of staffing to the level you want to grow. And I saw that work amazingly as we, in my situation, we're trying to build our dinner sales and staffing to the level that we wanted to grow, how quickly, when we were staffed, we were able to grow to the next level, giving that consistent service to our clients, our customers at the time. So.
Yeah. And then if we were to take that into, filling that pipeline, like Dr. Perdue, you were talking about, empowering, modeling the way, empowering others to be doing that job and really empowering them to show up as their authentic self and whatever, the strengths that they bring. I think that's a beautiful demonstration about how to care for ourselves, but also how to care for our people in the wake of that, and really bringing people in who are going to be engaged in their work. And we know that research tells us that then when people are working in their strengths, when people are showing up to the talent table with what they do best, they're going to be engaged, and organizations benefit greatly. To include profitability, that bottom line, when they have happy people showing up and filling that pipeline with people who are showing up authentically with their strengths.
Yeah.
So I would say go ahead.
No, go right ahead.
You.
All right. So we don't play tennis on conversations.
We're such a wonderful, polite group.
I'll go. I'll serve. Dr. Whelan, you talked about empowering people to be their authentic selves, and I think that's part of it. There's a term called, and I'm looking at the book, cultural agility. I think for these in the future, I'll put my bookshelf in the back here, like both of you. Uh, but there's this term called cultural intelligence, and it reminds me of an extension of emotional intelligence, and really, empathizing with others, especially others that may not be the same as you, maybe may not share the same cultural background. And so empowering others and having appreciation for differences, for diversity, for inclusion, whether it's women or minorities or folks from other countries. I mean, we are a world full of like a bouquet, right? And the more you let that bouquet, you empower that, the more your business can bloom. So I believe that if you have strength of cultural intelligence and allow people to be themselves, they're going to bring you more customers. They're going to come up with new ideas. You're going to, especially if you show them what's called agape or love, that you care about them as individuals. And this is also a biblical term, that they're going to be more engaged, and more engaged employees feel like they want to be more creative and innovative for the companies that they work for and that they serve. So I would really encourage a strength of cultural intelligence to improve not just the ability to empower those that are different, but the ability for those that are different to also be able to contribute to your business.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this is a great space where, you might look at, when I talk about that assessment, not just the operations external, but part of that is, who do I have? Who is on my team that can really, and what can they do? Because we know that everybody has strengths, and everybody can contribute when they're contributing in their strengths. So if I can help identify that and get them to contribute to that, we know that it raises, just as you were saying, Dr. Whelan, that people who are more engaged, I mean, they're literally 6 times more likely to, people who know their strengths are 6 times more likely to engage. So if I can help them know their strengths and help them work in their strengths, we know that the profitability, the productivity will raise. And that's part of my role as the leader, is identifying that and helping my team to identify that, and then work together and mesh together in those strengths. And really, just as you're saying too, Dr. Perdue, the people that really are in that front lines, they have great ideas. They have the best ideas for how to assist the organization in moving forward. So while you're doing that assessment, how can you glean and gather from the people that are really in it with you and for you, to engage them and to use their strengths in raising that productivity, the profitability, and really their entire satisfaction of the organization. So to me, while I might be able to identify that, and I think I'm good at doing that, this is a space where a coach can help you. And it's not, it really is, when you talk about that value to the organization of bringing somebody in to help that awareness for the organization, for the leader, and for the team to be able to help them move forward, I think is such an important component that we shouldn't overlook. We can do an amount of that ourselves, but bringing in somebody who can help us collecting and identifying that with the team can be really, it can make us look great as the leader when we can do that for the team, to help the team be better than it is and to be its best that it could be.
Yes, more than the sum of its parts.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
That's good. That's why she's the professor.
I'm learning all the time.
Oh. Well, there seems to be a common theme a lot right now around self-management as a competency, and really how we're showing up during this time. So I'd love to have a conversation around, people who are struggling with self-management, and perhaps, how they can rise up and be managing themselves better. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. Let me start with, I guess, so self-management, it reminds me of this term. I think I may have used this before with you, Dr. Kelly, the amygdala hijack.
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of ways, self-management is the space between whatever we're triggered by and our response. And understanding the brain, there's really these two major parts. There's the limbic system. There's many major parts, and any brain scientists out there, please don't hunt me down. Uh, but the limbic system,
unless you need a coach.
Unless you need a coach, exactly. And maybe we can work. Anyway, so the limbic system.
Sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. I was going to get asked the brain surgeon for some coaching as well to help me understand the brain better. But the limbic system is responsible for that emotional response. So if you think about it as the low road, right, the lower part of our brain, whenever something happens, and it could be an emotional desire like, hey, I want some ice cream, or someone said something to me in such a way that makes me angry, or I need to. And a lot of people that I'm coaching now, they're having a couple challenges. One is the how do I manage at home, because it's such a different environment. I'm not used to delineating my home life with my business life. So a lot of times the things that I may do at home are showing up in front of the Zooms or showing up in front of the other web platforms. The other thing is when we operate in a state of tension or anxiety or fear or worry, which this pandemic has brought about, we tend to be a lot more snappy. We tend to be a lot more trigger happy. So I think if we take an understanding of this amygdala, we're going to have these triggers, and the prefrontal cortex, which is our rational thinking brain, or the high road, and be able to connect the two. So in other words, if you pause before you react in whatever emotion you're feeling, your rational brain will engage and tell you what to do. And there's some ways to kind of prepare and prevent some of those trigger responses so that we better self-manage. And so I can talk a little bit about those, but I'll stop there and let someone else jump in.
I recently did an exercise with some students using just a simple tool, but it's so profound, and that's the wheel of life. And I'll wrap this around because I think this piece of awareness, while people know that they are having a difficult time, being able to drill into where that difficulty is coming from, that whole piece we talk about, and I think we talked about in the last session of awareness, leader awareness. So I know that I'm struggling. I know it's difficult, but how can we drill into the specific piece of what is difficult for me? And why am I struggling with my self-management? Am I struggling with the impulse? Am I struggling with, a schedule? Am I struggling? Where is the struggle? And something as simple as an awareness tool to help draw that out from somebody can assist them in the process. You don't have to have a coach for that. What you need is really the space that we call reflective time, to be able to answer some questions for yourself and pause and say, okay, what's really going on? And I think people haven't felt that they have that space. So that whole self-management is really getting lost a little bit. I mean, literally, I've been on Zoom calls where people's background is their bedroom closet. So we're talking about the space that they have, and they don't necessarily even have schedule space. So they don't feel like they have a space in their home to go. They don't necessarily feel that they have a space, in their time, in their schedule to go. So trying even just to assist folks by encouraging them to pause for a minute so that they can build that awareness of what's going on before they can try to solve that problem of that self-management. So the rush just keeps coming and coming and coming, and people haven't necessarily felt that they have the time for that reflective space. And I think that's a first component really in identifying that. And so back to that wheel, when I was doing that exercise, just the awareness that the individual had with a few simple questions around it help them to see where their struggle really was in their management, and then they could come up with an action point or two that they were going to be able to take in order to help them roll out of that. And I think that too is an important element for us as the leader, even as a friend, as a colleague, to be able to ask somebody some simple questions to help them pause so that they can think through and gain that awareness for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's so important, and you both touched on this, is really having that acceptance and accepting, yes, I am having these emotions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not beating yourself up over it, but then understanding them. And, so many times when that amygdala does get hijacked, we step into really muddy waters, right?
Mm.
You can't think. We're not operating in our strengths. If we're talking about strengths, we're not operating in those strengths if our mind is cluttered, especially with all those negative emotions. And really asking ourselves, what story are we telling ourselves? And is this truthful? Yes, you're experiencing it, but is what's coming into your mind the truth? Or do we need to reframe the story and get us back on track?
Yeah, and I'll also suggest and I taught I did a leadership training um, a couple of months ago, and one of the things that I actually trained on was, and this is really specific to more emotional intelligence and how do we prepare for when we are triggered. So you can basically, just like Dr. Wiater talked about, write down what triggers you. What are those times that actually triggers you? What emotions are felt? Really list those things out. And you want to reflect on what did you do? What action did you take? And then what effect did that have? So it's, cause and effect. So whatever was triggered, what actions you took, and what effect did that have? Because if self-management is a challenge for you, most likely you're reflecting on a negative action that was taken that resulted in a equally poor effect, right? So I think if you can understand what those triggers are and understand those actions that you take, and then plan to, okay, and the result I want to see is this, and then plan your response. So in other words, you can play forward, if you're triggered, how you will respond, and then what result you're going to see, so you can basically map out that change. The other thing I found helpful personally is, developing habits, developing habits so that you can do something on a consistent basis that's going to help you to better self-manage. And I've actually used a couple habit tracking apps. Habit Bull is one that I've used, and there's a few others. But really, really, because we're always on our phones, right? I mean, these things are an extension of our brains, right? So having a habit tracking app to remind you, and I would even say, gamify it a bit, right? If you're someone that likes um, pop-ups on Facebook, or likes, bubbles, or getting to the next level, some of these habit tracking apps will actually help you gamify your habits. So when you are better managing yourself, you'll say, okay, there, you're at day 7, reward yourself, hooray, go to the store. And one app that I used actually had where you built a character, and every time you got over a milestone, you're able to get a shield, or a coat, or a helmet, or a sword, or something of that nature. So I'd say, really look into developing better habits by planning for which habits you need to focus on.
I imagine that could help with, because the other area I think people are struggling with right now is conflict management and relationship management. Within the relationships, like you talked about, being at home and being, kind of out of sorts with family and with work and all those things. And then, yes, there's going to be conflict, and so. It sounds like that can also help with conflict management.
Yeah, absolutely. And just another part of conflict management, I lead a men's group, a men's Bible study. We talked about charity begins at home, or charity starts at home, and that whole concept of servant leadership. With servant leadership, there's 10 characteristics of servant leadership. And Dr. Kathleen Patterson has a model of servant leadership that starts with agape. I talked about that earlier. But the best way agape manifests itself, at least initially in conflicts, is to listen. The good book, James, talks about let every person be slow to speak. I'm sorry, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger, right? And so developing a skill of listening first for understanding, and that's actually part of empathy, right? It's a part of empathy, which is an emotional intelligence subscale. So being able to empathize starts with listening, and being able to listen can help reduce conflicts at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I imagine in the workplace as well. We need to be better listeners. So many times we're thinking about what we're going to say next instead of allowing ourselves just to, put on the duct tape on our mouth and open our ears.
That's right.
To what somebody is about to say. And it's all about honoring that person, the other person. When you actually take a moment, stop what you're doing, listen to what they have to say, that is a place of honor for the other person.
And one other quick nugget, if you say that pause between the listening and then you're speaking, but if you speak by saying, I understand what you're saying as such and such. In other words, if you replay back what you heard, so you're not so much worried about what you're thinking to say, to your point, right? About, let me think about what I'm going to say next, but showing that person that you're honoring them by understanding them, by repeating back what they heard, that can be a very good start to your point, in a work environment or at home, conflict reduction.
Yes. Yeah. Would you like to add anything, Dr. Wiater?
I think just a thought, that when we're talking about the current, especially the current situation where people are struggling and with their emotions is, I talked about reflection, but I also want to just talk about rest. And rest doesn't have to be, sleep, but can you pause and have a moment of something that restores you? Because when we're tired, when we're exhausted, we know that our responses are less controlled, and we have less control of what we're doing if we're not getting not just our sleep rest, but even that emotional, mental rest. Can you be quiet for a moment? Can you listen to something? Even these walks while you're working, while you're physically working, it can also be restorative to just pause, step away, and get away, and be something that gives us a little bit of strength. So not neglecting some of those things. And again, some of it goes back to simply time. I mean, I've talked to people who literally for a couple of weeks, several weeks, were literally with their children in their homes 24/7. And finding a space of rest, finding a place of quiet was so difficult for them. So I think that not ignoring, sometimes closing the door, sometimes just saying this is my space for 5 minutes, being able to pause and get that energy back that maybe is just seems impossible to make those spaces for ourselves in that.
Yeah, it reminds me of when I was a child. My mom was an elementary school teacher. And so she worked with kids all day. She was a single mom, would come home to 4 little kids. And she would just tell us, I just need 5 minutes. And we would see her on the floor. She'd be on the floor with her legs up on the couch, on the side of the couch. And she'd just need 5 minutes. And we knew it was a repeat, our repeated response was just to let mom be for 5 minutes. Of course, we just, all we wanted to do was be with mom because we hadn't seen her all day, but that's what she needed. And so I think that it goes back to, what do we need, right? In whatever situation that is. And then, like you said, finding what that is, like my mom did, allowing other people to honor her by, allowing her that time that she needed.
When you talk about this a lot, Dr. Whelan, is again, this place of permission. Can we give ourselves permission to reflect? Can we give ourselves permission to pause? Can we give ourselves permission to rest? And even just asking that question, I think, brings the answer that's there. Can we give ourselves permission? Will we give ourselves permission? Because the environment isn't giving us permission.
That's right.
But can we do that for ourselves?
Mhm.
Yeah.
What else do you have?
So, well, I guess the last thing I'll say on that is, I love the edict of giving ourselves permission, and the analogy of in the story of your mom, coming home, she's taking back her time for her own, sanity, right? For her own joy and happiness. And again, there's this concept of positive psychology of well-being. And I just wanted to give your listeners a couple of nuggets around that. Um, Journaling, gratitude journaling, everything that we've talked about today, really about your strengths, about your emotional mindset, taking time to reflect and not ruminate, ruminate is stewing in the negative, refusing to give yourself negative self-talk, and always affirm and speak positively over yourself. And then also in the mornings, exercising something that's in your strength, whether it's a competency strength or a character strength. For me, it's writing. For me, it's creating, right? And I think we've talked about StrengthsFinder, and we've talked about via character, and even emotional intelligence. You have strengths of those, but if you can focus on one of those strengths early in the day, that can help give yourself. You take that permission to have a life and a feeling of joy and happiness, and not of fear, anxiety, and worry, and cut the daggone news off during the day. Let me just say, so that they don't give them permission to steal that joy from you either. So,
yeah, and what happened when we do allow ourselves that permission to do that, we show up, incredibly well. My mother all she needed was those 5 minutes, and then she was ready to step into her role as mom. Right. And I think as leaders, and especially leaders who are home and who are operating out of, the closet in some cases, or the basement, or wherever they are, they're able to, if they take that time, give themselves permission to have some of that well-being. They can show up and be more present as a leader for their people and for their families. All right. Well, I think that just about does it for this episode of Ask Anything on Conversations for Leaders and Teams. I want to thank both of you for being here and for just pouring into the audience with your knowledge. I so appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you. A pleasure being here again.
Thank you, Dr. Whelan. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.